Thank you for joining me, everyone. I'm excited to talk to you about our 40-year journey on sensory cognitive processing. Let me start showing you some slides. We've spent 40 years on a mission to inspire every student with the magic and joy of learning, while championing at the same time sensory cognitive instruction in education. I put in this talk with you some heartfelt testimonials from some of our students. This is a mother who said, "This saved my daughter. Fantastic program. She didn't learn to read until the summer program at age 11, and now she graduated from college with honors in chemistry." I will forever thank Lindamood-Bell. I think that's important because I want you to know what we did in 40 years, but the challenges that we still have globally and certainly in America. So I'm going to go through these very quickly. We've, in 40 years, worked 51,000 students in learning centers, 2,046 students in our Lindamood-Bell Academy, the school that we wanted to start years ago and finally did. We've reached 308,000 students in schools. We have trained 85,000 teachers in 75 countries. We have had 135 school partnerships, and we've done research including other places, but including MIT, Stanford, University of Alabama, University of Washington, Wake Forest University, Georgetown, and we've had 19 peer-reviewed articles. We've looked at autism and dyslexia in those studies, the neurological impact of what we are calling sensory cognitive instruction. So all in all, we're very excited about what we've accomplished and happy about it in 40 years. I can't believe where the years went, but they have gone, and as we look back, we have done a lot, and I'm proud of it. The problem is that we still are faced with, despite all of that, with ongoing challenges in the field of learning. I put a few of these to get you started in your thinking on why what I'm going to be talking about is important. With a world population of 7.9 billion, 1.58 billion people experience a learning disability. And in America, 7.2 million students have a condition qualifying them for SPED, special ed. 85% have a primary learning disability in reading and are processing language. This recently came out. This is the nation's school report card. It's called NAEP, National Assessment of Educational Progress, and our students continue to decline in 4th and 8th grade. This is alarming. Only 33% of 4th graders scored at or above proficient. That's the lowest since 2005. Only 31% of 8th graders, and of course, that's worse as I think about it. Here's kindergarten through 8th grade in that pipeline, and that means that in the 8th grade, where they were in 4th grade is alarming, but now where they are in 8th grade as they go into higher education or high school and possibly higher education, their scores are the lowest since 1998, only 31%. So I'm wanting to talk to you about, after 40 years, what we think could be a solution, and that is sensory cognitive instruction. So what do I mean by that? That's a new term. People talk about the simple view of reading. They talk about dyslexia. They talk about autism. They talk about learning challenges. I'm talking about sensory cognitive instruction, and that develops cognition and teaches students to explicitly apply cognitive processing to all learning, especially the interplay of reading skills. So I'm going to be talking to you in the rest of this talk about cognition, what it is, how we can stimulate it, and how that applies to an interplay of reading. Reading is not just one skill, it is an interplay of skills. So first, a quick slide on cognition. Cognition refers to mental processes involved in acquiring, storing, and using knowledge. Cognition encompasses all forms of knowing and awareness, including perceiving, remembering, reasoning, and problem solving. Cognition underlies all basic skills. Cognition underlies all basic skills, including reading and math. In essence, cognition is how we think, learn, and understand the world around us. So if cognition is that important, it's important then that any instruction, any intervention needs to develop cognition. And years ago, as Pat Lindamood and I were looking at what we were doing with instruction, we realized that our instructional experience aligned with a general theory of cognition called dual coding theory, DCT, by Alan Pavio. And I just want you to visualize with me for a moment what this is. Dual coding theory proposes that human cognition utilizes two distinct systems of processing information: verbal, language, and nonverbal, imagery. The interplay, there's that word again, the interplay of verbal and nonverbal information encompasses comprehension, problem solving, critical thinking, and all learning outcomes. I included this slide even though it's long. This is what Alan Pavio wrote in Mind and Evolution in 2007, and this is important. I accept the obvious truism that language played a critical role in our giant intellectual leap as a species, but language never worked its magic alone, and it cannot do so now. As I'm reading this to you, I'm thinking, especially now when we think of the power of images that are made for us, instead of, as a society, instead of us making our own images, we watch a lot of TV, we watch a lot of movies, and we do a lot of social media that makes images for us as almost all language. And it can't do so now, Pavio went on to say. Instead, it has always depended on a silent partner that provides us with something to talk about, a general cognitive system that had evolved to a higher level before it invited language in as a co-player in the evolutionary scene. I see language as a benevolent, octopus-like parasite whose tentacles invaded the brain and was empowered by it to survive and thrive to the point where it could contribute something useful to its host. Therefore, nonverbal mind and verbal mind thus became interlocked in a synergistic relation that evolved into the nuclear power source of our intellect. He's talking about the silent partner of imagery, which I'm going to be talking as we go on. But why did Lindamood-Bell call it sensory cognitive? And that's because, this is Pat Lindamood, she said, this is a fact. The brain can only receive information from our senses, and it is the multisensory organ. So as we're working with students, we're looking at the sensory processing of each student. Now we talk about imagery, and I said the sensory input of imagery is a primary sensory cognitive function. And there are three of those functions. One you're very well aware of, I'm sure, and that's called phoneme awareness. And that's the ability to perceive the identity, number, and sequence of sounds within words. This is probably new for you. Symbol imagery, I'm going to say PA for phoneme awareness as we go on. SI for symbol imagery is the ability to create mental imagery, back to Pavio, for sounds and letters within words. And then there's concept imagery. It is the ability to image a gestalt or a whole for oral and written language. And both of those play a critical part in learning. Pavio said that imagery includes not only static representations, but also dynamic representations of action sequences and relationships between objects and events. And we think of that as symbol imagery, static, and concept imagery, which is dynamic. So symbol imagery is imagery for sounds and letters within words. And I'm going to have you experience this yourself in a little bit. And concept imagery is an image whole, the gestalt for oral and written language. So let's see how your symbol imagery is. If I say to you, what letters do you picture if I say this word, flip, you should be picturing some letters, F-L-I-P. If I say change the I to an A, you should be able to mentally change that. And then if we change from flip and change the I to an A, it would say flap. Let me do something a little bit more extreme with you. What if I say take flap and make it be flasp? What letters would you see? And if you have good symbol imagery, you can just rapidly manipulate those. If you don't, you're probably experiencing some difficulty with reading or spelling. Now let's look at concept imagery, the dynamic relationships. What do you picture when I say the black horse ran across the green field, galloping as fast as he could, and then leapt over a rock fence? Were you able to create some images for that? You should have some movement and some color in those. And so when you did that, your brain instantly created that imagery, which is what you need to do when you're reading or when you're listening to language. Individuals differ in this. Individuals differ in the extent, manner, and efficiency of employment of each of the systems according to their verbal and nonverbal habits and skills. What I just did with you was to see how your your imagery processing was working for both concept imagery and for symbol imagery. But there could be individual differences in the audience that are listening to me, and there are also individual differences for students that we see. And here's what happens. When there are individual differences in symbol imagery, this weakness can negatively impact foundational reading skills, including word attack, word recognition, and paragraph reading. Our recent research indicates that symbol imagery is a stronger predictor of reading skills than phonological awareness. And obviously, phonological awareness is tracking the identity number and sounds in words, and it's obviously critical. But being able to manipulate and process symbol imagery is more predictive for reading, because that is with letters, is more predictive for reading, and it is also predictive for word attack skills. Individual differences in concept imagery. Now, this one is probably what I feel like my life work has been about. When concept imagery is weak, it may seem like information goes in one ear and out the other. So whether it's oral or written language, it can come in and sort of go through. There's an ability to have it go in and create a bunch of dynamic imagery. Instead, that imagery students seem to get parts, maybe some facts, maybe a date, maybe a name, maybe a piece, rather than the whole. And it's the gestalt of the whole that's needed for critical thinking, such as main idea, conclusions, predictions, and logic. For example, you cannot get the main idea of something if you've only got a few parts. You can't take a few parts and draw a conclusion from parts. You're going to draw the wrong conclusion. So my life's work for me really has been to try to make a difference for those students that experience weakness in this, and I can show you that we can help them comprehend language better. So if we are looking now at the interplay of reading, remember I said the two things we're going to look at, and that is cognition and the interplay of reading. Here's what it looks like. In the field of reading, when I was getting a master's in reading, it was clear that we tend to focus on parts. Like we would have people talk about phonics. If you just taught phonics, everyone would be able to read. When that didn't work for everybody, then we did a look-say approach and taught just visual memory for words, but not that. So over here, we focused on this one. Let me erase that. And over here, we focused on look-say, we focused on that one. And then along came something called whole language that focused on just reading in context and guessing from context cues. Well, obviously, if you have a student that has weakness here or weakness here in sounding out words or recognizing words, then if they were just going to use context cues, too many words would not be recognized by them, and then that would force them to guess. And they can often guess wrong. And all of these things, these circles, all of these circles are subsets, because the greater set of reading is comprehension. Now, I'm going to erase this again with some magic. this says sensory cognitive functions underlie each part. So in comprehension, when we experience concept imagery, that underlies the whole, grasping what you're being able to visualize as you read or listen to language. And over here, all of these, it is phonological awareness and symbol imagery, really more symbol imagery over here, and then a combination of all of it for reading fluently in context. So as we look at those sensory cognitive functions, I've put two distinct students here for you to think about. This is the student that might even be labeled dyslexic. This student may have difficulty if symbol imagery is weak. Let's say this. If Buzz has weak symbol imagery, then he's going to have difficulty with accurate and fluent decoding, word attack skill, etc. So if this is weak, when we do a diagnostic testing, we see that weak symbol imagery also manifests itself in some weakness here. However, it might not manifest itself in comprehension. A lot of the students that we've worked with that are labeled dyslexic have really good comprehension, especially oral language comprehension. Their written language comprehension can be impacted because they aren't reading the words accurately. But there's another type of student that is not as easily recognized. And this is a student that has concept imagery weakness. This student, let me erase these again. This student, and this is Sophie. Sophie has really great skills in word attack, could be at the 12th grade level, 12th grade level, 12th grade level. Comprehension could be as far down as the 3rd grade level. There's a discrepancy between her oral vocabulary and her ability to read compared to her comprehension. And that is because she has weakness in concept imagery. So what I try to show you here is that there's a separation. You can have this student that has weakness in decoding because of the sensory cognitive weakness in symbol imagery, or you can have a student that has weakness in concept imagery and therefore weakness in comprehension and critical thinking, or a lot of our students experience both of those weaknesses. So what does sensory cognitive instruction look like then? If we're trying to develop DCT, dual coding, and if we're trying to develop that imagery language connection or interplay, and we're doing it with symbol imagery and concept imagery, what does that instruction look like? Our goal is for independence, and our goal is that when we develop that imagery language interplay, that sensory cognitive processing, that enables the student to monitor their response. They don't need you and me standing there. That, because they can monitor their response, they really don't need us because they can self-correct. And if they can self-correct, then they become independent. And that's all based on developing the sensory cognitive processing. Here's what a 4th grade student said. Before Lindamood-Bell, that's how she refers to us, I never felt like I could read out loud in front of people. It always felt just weird, and I never volunteered to read out loud in class or at home. Now I feel good about it, and I want to ask to read. So what does that instruction look like with us? First thing that we do, number 1, is we do a learning ability evaluation, what we call an LAE. We can do them online or we can do them in our learning centers. We have 47 learning centers now to determine an individual's strengths and weaknesses in learning. Once we know what those strengths and weaknesses are, we then differentiate the instruction based on that LAE. Then my favorite thing is that we offer intensive intervention because you want to quickly get in and get out. You want to quickly develop the skills and apply that sensory cognitive processing to literacy skills. So when we do intensive intervention, as opposed to a couple hours a week or half hour, 3 days a week, when we do intensive intervention, we focus on the sensory system and that sensory cognitive processing. We do it 4 hours a day, 5 days a week. And in 6 to 8 weeks, we can have extremely big changes, large, substantial changes in processing language. And we offer this both in person and online instruction with equally powerful outcomes. We can thank COVID for that. we had to put our instruction online, and since then we've been able to track how it compares to our in-person intervention. So in our learning centers, since I think this data is only from 2004, and we had learning centers before that, but we didn't track the data, we've seen approximately 30,000 students. And what I think is interesting about this slide and why I kept it in here, this is decoding over here. So you can see that 44% of our students come to us with decoding issues, and many of those students come to us with a prior label of dyslexia, or when we look at their scores, even if they haven't been labeled dyslexic, their performance on the LAE has what would be a dyslexic profile. Obviously, it's fairly easy to see when someone is reading a word wrong. Let's say that they look at this and say basket. That's an obvious processing error. But only 24% of our students come to us with only a comprehension issue. And I think that is the I have more concern about our comprehension only students than I do our dyslexic or our decoding students, because if you have a weakness in comprehension, it's impacting not only what you read, but also what you hear in terms of language. What's interesting about this slide, I'm going to erase it again. What's interesting about this slide, this group over here are the decoding plus the comprehension students. And so what I think is interesting is that this percent, which now is 54% of our students, need some form of comprehension work, some development for comprehension. I put this in because this is what parents said. That came to our learning centers. The staff are wonderful, and they changed my daughter's life in the best way. She went from fearful and ashamed about not being able to read to enjoying reading so much in just 100 hours. And I put that in there because I want you to see that the change can happen very quickly with intensive intervention. So let's just have a few more slides here. Let's look at what happens to these decoding only students. So here's Sophie over here, and I braid her out. And we're focusing now on symbol imagery. Let's see what happens. So symbol imagery means we're focusing on the subsets, not focused on comprehension. And how do we do that? We directly look at the sensory input. Everything, all of the program steps mean that our instructors are looking to see how Buzz can visualize. And of course, this is letters. We go from a vowel consonant to multisyllables. And this is what happens. Here's your Venn diagram that you now know about. We're working on these circles, the word attack, word recognition, and contextual reading up there. Let me show it to you this way. These are the circles we're working on. This is data on 11,395 students with an average age of 9.6. Well, what's interesting about this slide for you is that this is after 112 hours of intervention. And I want you to look at the light blue. This is a symbol imagery test. This is the phonological awareness test, the LAC test. This is a word attack test. This is a word recognition test. This is reading accuracy. This is fluency. This is comprehension. And this is vocabulary. You can see that the highest score on here for these students is vocabulary. So these students have the potential to read at or above their grade level, but they're not. And after we did 112 hours of, this was symbol imagery instruction, obviously the symbol imagery test improved because we actually teach that test. So it's not as meaningful to me. What is meaningful is the phonological awareness test using little colored blocks. We never did anything like that in instruction, and look at the huge gain in phonological awareness from symbol imagery instruction. Word attack, word recognition, accuracy probably need more time than 112 hours to get it to apply both of these. But look at comprehension improved, and of course vocabulary was where it should have, was in good shape to begin with. So if you look at those changes now in standard scores, this is phoneme awareness, word attack, word recognition. All of these are what are considered large standard score changes. Let's look at the students I'm really concerned about. So if I finish up here, we worked on here and we started to fill in those circles for our students. But now let's look at comprehension only students, the ones that are so difficult to see. They look like they're just not trying or not paying attention to something in the room. And in fact, really what can be happening is the language is going in and going out. So for our comprehension only students, most of these students have all of these inner circles filled in. Their weakness is in comprehension. So we're going to develop their concept imagery. And that, again, follows a series of steps, and we're looking really closely at developing an image gestalt, or concept imagery, or gestalt imagery. So we go through a series of steps to do that. We start with a picture, go to one word, then a sentence, then multiple sentences, sentence by sentence, then multiple sentence by multiple sentence, then a whole paragraph, until we have developed that ability to create an image gestalt. And right around here, we start applying that to higher order thinking skills. So let's see what happens with those students. Remember, here's your Venn diagram. Now we're working just on that comprehension circle. This data is on 105 hours, 7,000 students approximately. Their age was 12. And I think that that's interesting, since I think that if you remember that the decoding only students were 9 years old on the average, doesn't mean that that's an average, it's a mean. So obviously we're having some younger and some older. But on the mean age for comprehension students, they're almost 13 years old. And I think that's because it takes some time for someone to recognize that this is a weakness. Now look at these scores. Word attack skills, if this is the 50th percentile, look how high those word attack skills are. Word recognition skills, a complete flip-flop from the decoding students. Accuracy, fluency, here's comprehension, here's vocabulary, here's word opposites, another vocabulary test. I think what I want you to focus on is that this written language comprehension score is the 23rd percentile versus reading accurately and be able to sound out words being at the 63rd and 68th percentile. I also want you to notice that the 23rd percentile in written language comprehension, reading comprehension, was markedly different than the vocabulary skills. So let's see what happens with those students. Well, I can erase this and show you quickly here that written language comprehension, reading comprehension, our focus up here, went from the 23rd percentile to the 45th percentile with 105 hours of intervention. And that looks like standard score changes that are huge in reading comprehension. Impressive, huh? And a big concern that so many students have this issue. Now I'm going to show you something about severe comprehension students. These, again, we're looking at this circle. There's only 892 students, an average age of 10. Some of these students had a prior diagnosis of autism. Not all of them, but some. And after 106 hours of instruction, I'll show you the gains. You can see it right here in written language comprehension, which is huge, which is life-changing. But look at this. These students, if you look at word attack, word recognition, look how intact these inner circles were. This was never an issue for them. They were at the 82nd, 87th, 88th percentile, accuracy above the 50th percentile. But even with vocabulary as high as it was coming in, they were at the 8th percentile in reading comprehension. And here's a better example of how that changed. From the 8th percentile to the 47th percentile. Every time I see this, I gasp. That is absolutely life-changing. Because that is, for that student, if you're changing their reading comprehension like that, you're probably also changing their oral language comprehension. There it is again in standard score changes. Now, the last category I'll quickly show you is the students that come to us that are both decoding and comprehension students. And of course, we do all of these. We do symbol imagery and concept imagery with those students. And this is what happens after 148 hours. Some of those students have longer because they have to do both decoding and comprehension. That's 8,000 students, the average age of 11. You can see the standard score changes are large in phoneme awareness, word attack, word recognition, accuracy, fluency, written language comprehension, not vocabulary. Was only a medium one, but we had not worked on that either. All of that to say that I'm happy to be sharing 40 years of work with you. I have just a few more slides that I want to share. This one I put in because this individual came to us and is now a SPED teacher. She says, I went to Lindamood-Bell 20 years ago, and of course my hands do look older. I was 9 and I couldn't read or write. That place honestly changed my life. I came out of the summer program reading at grade level and continued to advance. Important. I'm now a SPED teacher and I can never be more grateful. So the last thing I want to say to you is that probably this is one of the most important things I'm going to say, but let me say this first. If we measure sensory cognitive processing, differentiate the diagnosis, and provide instruction to develop the sensory input of imagery, remember Alan Pavio and the imagery-language connection, students can become independent in language literacy skills. And this, I really want to leave you with this thought. Our reading disability does not have to be a lifelong handicap. We've done research with Stanford that shows that the students that were, the research was on dyslexic students, that the dyslexic students made more gains, the most severe dyslexic students made the best gains. And this is what I want to say. If the brain can change, the behaviors can change. And I thank you for joining me. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to have done this with my life and all the people that have shared this dream with me. And I hope to see you in one of our learning centers. Thank you. If you have questions, feel free to email me. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. And then if you're live, watching this instead of looking at a recording, you can click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit a question. Thank you very much.